to introduce to you Thomas Greiger. He is with Nutanix, and we're going to talk about 5 ways IT pros can simplify end-user management with hyperconverged VDI. So with that, I'd like to turn the show over to Thomas.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. In the name of Nutanix, thank you for the opportunity to speak on your call. So what I'm going to do quickly is do an introduction of the company, and then we'll jump into the 5 ways IT pros can simplify the EUC. So first and foremost, a little bit about Nutanix. So we are a startup out of Silicon Valley, headquartered in San Jose. We've been around for about 5 years now. Some people joke that we are no longer a startup. If you look at the numbers, we have actually, the number is almost 2,000 customers now. We serve about 70 countries on 6 continents. The employee range is about 1,500 by now. So pretty drastic growth. We're actually one of the fastest growing companies out of Silicon Valley. And the reason is, hopefully you'll understand when I explain the technology. It's literally the technology and how we are breaking the ground to new thinking and new ways of doing things. Not just VDI, but in general, but we'll naturally focus on VDI. A few other things, Gartner already recognized us as the leader. If you look, we're leading the pack of hyperconverged, or as they call it, integrated systems. We got there last year. We're also recognized by IDC. And now the other most important part, we're all about the experience. So one thing is to have a great technology, and I'll explain that very soon here, but the other thing is the user experience end-to-end, and that includes support. No matter how great the technology is, things do break. It may not necessarily be Nutanix, it could be the software running on top of it, like VDI. So what we decided to do is to have an end-to-end tech support, which never finger points. So what that means is you place a call, let's say your VDI is slow, we'll troubleshoot with you. Even if we find out that the issue is, let's say, in the VDI vendor, we'll stay on it. We'll open a tech support with the specific vendor on your behalf. So you basically have one phone number to call and one person to deal with. And as a result, what you see here is there's something called Net Promoter Score. It's being measured basically on tech support experience, and also how likely is the customer to recommend that specific company being measured to somebody else. And the score goes from -100 to +100. To give you an idea, the industry standard for IT companies is around 25 to 30. If you look at Nutanix on the right side, we're about 90 plus. And the reason being is because of how we do the tech support. The other thing is our tech support is exclusively level 3, so you don't have to deal with level 1, level 2. Every call you place is going to be level 3. And it's typical 24/7, 12 languages, follow the sun, etc. Very important for the experience. So now, last slide, it's customer base. If you can see here, we have, in the 5 years, we acquired a lot of customers across different industries. A lot of them are big names, as you can see here. It's just to validate that the architecture is so great that customers are adopting it at the unprecedented rate. One thing on the customer base, you probably notice in the public sector, we have a lot of, we jokingly call them 3-letter agencies in the federal government. And if you look at the federal government historically, they generally wait for the commercial sector to bake new technologies. Once they're successful, then they give it a try. With Nutanix, it was actually the other way, which is very unusual in the industry. All the federal agencies, including DOD and DOA, they decided to give us a try because they saw so much value in it. So they went with us early, and they've been very successful so far. Okay, so let's talk about VDI. I always put this picture in because when you mention VDI, this is generally the reaction we get. And the reason for that is there is multiple actual reasons. One is, how do I scale that? How do I accomplish user experience? How expensive is this going to be? And when we started our company, we actually focused on VDI. Our initial thought was VDI, and then since then we morphed into supporting any workload. But again, we will be focusing on VDI. Quick brief into what we did. So in the 1990s, if you look back in history, you had servers running single workloads. And servers were x86 boxes with some kind of a local attached storage and then running silos. So every server, physical server, was running single app workload. Then if you morph into today, what you see today is still physical servers, much more powerful, but they all run virtualization for the most part on top. And then you run multiple workloads on top of physical servers. So you have one physical server running, 50, 100 workloads. As a result of virtualization, SAN was born, storage area network. So what you see here is you have the servers connected to SAN running virtualization, and then you run your apps. For example, the app being VDI. Now, if you look at that and you need to scale, which is typical for VDI, because unlike server workloads where you're limited to, let's say, hundreds or several hundred VMs, in a VDI world, you're easily scaling to thousands or 10,000s of VMs. You need to scale the architecture somehow. So unfortunately, the architecture was great when it was invented, but virtualization kind of got ahead of it. So virtualization caused that, when you try to scale so-called 3-tier architecture, you have to do scale out, scale up, and it's not very feasible economically, and it's very difficult to do. So again, I'll give you one more animation. It's very complex. If you look at 3-tier architecture today and you want to scale it, this is what you're dealing with. You have to deal with big increments. You have to purchase basically upfront a lot of equipment. The deployment takes months, sometimes even 6 months, half a year. It's very difficult to manage. You're dealing with different vendors. You're dealing with different components, different management consoles. As a result, naturally, it's very difficult to scale, not to mention the economics of that. And then the support, it goes back to multiple vendors, finger pointing, etc. So what we did at Nutanix, we decided to revamp the data center. So our idea is that the data center of 21st century should meet these 4 criteria. It should be agile, it should be secure, it should be very simple, and it should be scale out. And let me tell you, when I was actually recruited to Nutanix about 3 years ago, they were talking to me about the simplicity and 15 minutes to deploy a whole data center, and I was thinking, well, that's great marketing, but I want to see what you really have. And then they showed me what they had, and I was sold, because as an engineer, I was impressed how they simplified everything. So if you look what Nutanix does, we took all these complexities you see on the left side, and we turned them into something simple, almost like a Lego block. It's a hyperconverged appliance which can infinitely scale. So as you need to scale, you're just adding so-called Lego blocks. You keep stacking them up as you need. And I'll cover it in more details in the next slide, what this gives you specifically for VDI. So we'll focus on 3 things first: the architecture, then the purchasing model, and the technology, all 3 related to VDI. So if we focus on the architecture, I touched on it a little bit. Our architecture is a scale-out architecture. So what that means is, here's a high-level view. Think of Nutanix as, we're actually a software company. Some people get confused, software, hardware. Yes, we do sell appliances, but the appliances are not made by us. The appliances, or for us. The appliances, we just use industry standard, and I'll cover that in my next slide. But if you look at the architecture, it's basically an x86 server, 64-bit, Intel. You choose the number of cores, you choose the memory, and then every single server will have a load of local attached storage. SSDs and HDDs, we have models with SSDs only, and then on every single node, which is, again, a server, you will run something called controller VM. You see it right here. It stands for a controller VM, CVM, and it's on every single node. That's our software controller. That's where all the Nutanix intellectual property is. And basically what happens is that Nutanix software, the CVM, has access to the underlying storage and then presents it out and combines it from every single node in the cluster. So again, it's a clustered system. You have number of nodes. You start with 3, and then you can infinitely scale to however many you need. There is no limit, upper limit of how many nodes. And then the storage is combined from all the nodes, and it's treated as a single entity, and it's managed in a very simple way. Now, when it comes to the rest of the x86 platform, it's just a server, right? So it's basically x86 box, which then you can run any of the industry hypervisors, ESX, Hyper-V, or we have our own now called Acropolis, or we sometimes call it AHV, Acropolis hypervisor. So when you hear me say AHV, I'm referring to our own hypervisor. So these are all the choices you have. You choose the hardware you want, you choose the hypervisor you want, and then the Nutanix software comes automatically with it. It combines the storage and creates basically a cluster of compute resources and storage resources. And hopefully on the next slide, it will make a little more sense. So if you look what we do, today we're certified on 3 hardware platforms, Lenovo, Dell, or Supermicro. They're completely identical when it comes to functionality, what you can or cannot do. It's just the customer preference. Some customers like Supermicro, some Dell, some Lenovo. Then, again, you choose the hypervisor of your choice, ESX, Hyper-V, or our own, and then we give you the Nutanix software. The Nutanix software is split into 2 pieces, Prism and Acropolis. On today's call, I'll just focus on Acropolis as being the distributed storage fabric and mobility fabric. Distributed storage fabric does all the data protection, deduping, compression, all the magic with data. And mobility fabric allows you to do application mobility between different platforms, between different Nutanix generations, etc. And then on the left side there's Prism, which is a unified management, and I'll touch base on that as well. And naturally, because we're an open platform, highly scalable, we also expand to this cloud. We support AWS, Azure, and then we work with Microsoft Nutanix VMware as well. So now on the next slide, we're going to focus on the purchasing model. Basically, what is important for VDI is I actually used to work for Citrix, and Citrix is the leader, the undisputed leader in the industry. VMware is breathing their neck very closely, so I would say number one, number two. And if you look at all their deployments, the number one challenge they still face is how to properly size VDI. The issue is always, okay, we're going to grow to 5,000 users, but we want to start small. Well, typically, you would have to size for the goal of 5,000 users because it may be actually cheaper to do that than try to scale into it and then just do forklift upgrades every time I try to scale into it. So that was number one issue. Number two issue was, how do we size it in general? Like, how many CPUs do I need? How much storage do I need? Is the storage going to scale? So at Nutanix, with the architectural model I just showed you, we drastically changed that. But we give you two options. We can go the traditional way. You can go in and spec it. Let's say, you tell us the number of users, the profile of the users, and then we'll just size it based on those input data. We'll say, based on the input you gave us, you will need 10 nodes with these specs, and it should support the number of users. But some customers are saying, well, what if it is not going to support that? So at Nutanix, we came up with something called VDI Assurance, and I'm going to spend time on the VDI Assurance program a little bit. So what VDI Assurance is, typically you size, then you choose what you want, and then you assure it. And what that means is you size it the way you would normally do, again, based on the input, the profile of the user, is the task user, is the power user, is the knowledge user. Then you choose what advanced features do you need. Are you going to be doing DR between sites? Is it going to be a single site? Are the users going to be connected remotely, mostly locally, mix of both, etc.? So you do all of that. You basically can do that with any technology. But what you can do with Nutanix is assure it at the end. And basically what assurance does, it assures that CPU, memory, storage, and IOPS will be performing the way it was promised you to. The way we do that is, naturally, we have confidence in our own architecture with infinite scalability. We're truly linear, infinitely scalable architecture. So we don't have a problem scaling it to tens or hundreds of thousands of users. But what assurance does, it's actually a program. It's basically a SKU. A partner like cStor will put on top of the purchase, and what will happen next is Nutanix will work with the partner, and we'll make sure the sizing is done properly. We'll create a solution architecture, and then we'll propose these two last bullet points. We'll do remote post-installation health check, verification, and design. It happens about every 6 months for 3 years. It's included in the assurance. What it does, we'll do checkpoints every 6 months to see that the environment is behaving the way we promised you, again, on CPU, memory, storage, and IOPS. We're not assuring the experience on the VM level because it's very difficult to do. It's very relative. What is acceptable to one user may not be. What we're assuring is what we can measure, which is the CPU, memory, storage, and IOPS. And we guarantee that for the duration of the assurance. So what happens then is basically, like you see here, we do the post-installation health check, and if we find that something is not right, that it's not performing the way we promised that it should be, well, we try to find what the issue is. Maybe it's a misconfiguration. Maybe a user load is higher than it should be. If that's not the case, then we'll go into dealing with, well, maybe there's not enough Nutanix nodes. And if we find out that it really wasn't properly sized, which never happened before, but it could, and it's legal in the contract, we'll provide additional hardware at no cost to make sure that the performance meets what was promised at the beginning. So it gives you the peace of mind that you size it properly for the number of users you have, and that it will function during the duration of the VDI assurance deal as soon as you meet the checks, and then everything is correct. So again, the first correction would be try to find out what it is software-wise, maybe give you a software update. If it doesn't correct, we'll give you additional hardware. Again, very rare, never happened so far, but you have the peace of mind. Then the next focus will be the technology itself. Let's talk about the technology. So what it means is it's pay as you grow, right? I talked about it a little bit several times during this call, but let's give you a visual. Let's say you want to start with 100 users. Let's say this is a reg view, right? So you put a 2U appliance from Nutanix with 4 nodes in it, aka 4 servers, and it supports 500 users. Now you need to grow. All you need to do is add a few more nodes. We go by nodes, by the way, not by appliance. So you add as many nodes as you need. It could be as little as 1 or as many as you need. You need to grow again, you just add additional nodes. And you can keep scaling at this pace at your own time. What it allows you to do is basically what you see on the next slide. We guarantee a true linear scale-out performance. So every time you add a Nutanix node, the IOPS, the CPU, the memory, and the storage will increase in a linear fashion. And we guarantee that, not just by the assurance, but also by the technology itself. So in a VDI world, this is very important because if you know, for example, this is individual per user, how many you can put on a node, depending on the type of node, what kind of VDI you use, what applications do you have in the VDI. For the sake of conversation, let's say you decided to use 100 users on one node. If that's what you're comfortable with, it performs well. Then you know that to support 400 users, you need 4 nodes. To support 800 users, you need 4 additional nodes, 8 total. To go to 1,200 users, you will need 12 nodes. So it becomes a simple math. So it's a predictable economics and growth. And there is no gotchas. We don't tell you when you reach 12 nodes, oops, sorry, now you need to deploy another management server, or you need to buy 3 more nodes just to support the 12 other nodes from a management point of view. We are shared nothing, distributed everything architecture. So there is not a single point of failure at all anywhere in the architecture. So this is all you're doing. You're adding nodes. And you don't have to do silos. You can run your VDIs, and you can run your support infrastructure like brokers, licensing, SQLs, etc. on the same Nutanix cluster, the same set of nodes. Now, let me give you a visual of what it looks like. So in this example, I'm going to show you the Supermicro appliance, but the same logic applies to Lenovo or Dell. It looks exactly the same. With us, we simplify the solution so much that there is no proprietary fabric, there is no SAN, all you need is a node. Well, naturally, the node has to be housed somewhere. So what we call this is a chassis, or we sometimes call it a block, and literally it's a passive chassis to house one of those Nutanix nodes. Again, just a reminder, the node is a server with storage, hypervisor, and a Nutanix controller. The minimum is 3, so you have to start with 3. You put them in, and then you uplink them to the top of a rack switch. And again, notice, we're using a top of a rack switch, regular Ethernet. We're not using a proprietary fabric. This is the same switch you would use for anything Ethernet related you use already today in your infrastructure. So once you do that, you form a cluster, and on the right side, you see what happens. You get a certain amount of IOPS, compute, and storage. Now, if you need to scale, all you need to do is add additional node. You add additional node, you plug it to the top of a rack switch, and notice what happens next. Your compute, storage, and IOPS increase. Now, if you need an additional node, well, naturally, you need a new chassis. You put a new chassis and you slide an extra node in it. You uplink it to the top of a rack switch, and notice again what happens. Your IOPS, compute, and storage are growing. The linear way I was explaining in the previous slide. And then you keep going this way. You keep adding nodes, and it keeps growing your IOPS, compute, and storage. When you run out of space in the chassis, you just get another chassis. You slide a node in that chassis, you uplink it, and you grow. And the beauty of the solution is that you can mix and match different types of nodes. There is no backplane communication between the chassis. So no matter how many nodes you have, they all communicate through the top of a rack switch, regardless of where they live in what chassis. That gives you the freedom to scale infinitely, mix different generation, different models, etc., and give you the true scale-out linear growth. So now, let's talk about what it looks like from a management point of view and also tech support point of view. So if you look at a typical VDI solution today, you have to run on all these components. And I'm not picking on any vendors. They're all great vendors, but these are the complexities you have to deal with. So you start with the bottom fabric. You have to choose a vendor for that. Then you need to choose your server platform. Again, I just picked a few vendors. Then you need to pick a proprietary fabric to connect to the storage, like I have QLogic Emulex. Then you do that, Brocade Cisco. Then you choose your vendor for the storage. And then you choose your hypervisor. And then you can finally focus on the VDI itself. And you're dealing with all these layers just to get your VDI. In the Nutanix world, it looks like this. Here is your Ethernet. You still have to choose that no matter what. You choose the Nutanix platform. And on top of the Nutanix platform, you choose one of the 3 supported hypervisors. If you decide to choose the KVM, which is the Nutanix, the Acropolis hypervisor, at the end, this is what it looks like. And I apologize, the slides are not advancing properly, but here it is. So if you look at it, you're dealing with technically 3 vendors. Your network vendor, Nutanix for everything else, including hypervisor, and then finally your VDI solution, let's say Citrix or View, instead of 10 vendors. That naturally translates into 10 support numbers versus 3 support numbers. Remember, Nutanix will place the call to the VDI vendor, and if needed, even to the network vendor. So technically 1, but to be realistic, 3 if you feel like it. Now, when it comes to management consoles, there is 1 and single management for everything on Nutanix. There is 1 management for your network, and then there's management for the VDI vendor. So you're dealing with 3 consoles as opposed to 7, 8 consoles. So it drastically simplifies life. So as a side effect, but very important one, of the hyperconvergence is reduction in footprint. We hyperconverge it. You don't deal with all the fabric, cabling, all that. We can go as low as 90%. Realistically, it depends on the workload and the platform you choose, but it ranges anywhere between 70 to 90% reduction in footprint. What it translates into is savings in cooling, power, naturally the space in the data center if you're renting it. So it gives you drastic savings in the footprint. Couple of more slides. I talk about the management. Our management is, again, there is no management server. Like, for example, Hyper-V has a SCVMM. It's a standalone component which sits above Hyper-V. vCenter is above all the ESX nodes. With Nutanix, every Nutanix node is the management. There is no install. It's HTML5. So all you need to do is open up a browser, point it at the Nutanix cluster, authenticate, and you get a beautiful HTML5 UI where you do everything. Because it's hyperconverged, in one single place you're looking at your hypervisor, your VMs, your storage, your compute, your hardware. Everything is inside. We don't have time to show a live demo on this call, but just few slides. This is what it looks like. It's HTML5 based in a VDI world. Because it's hyperconverged, if you have a user calling that something is slow, you can literally just go in one single pane of glass and look at everything. Correlate the storage performance with the CPU performance, the cluster performance, and very quickly find out what's going on. Just few visuals, what the UI looks like. There's different tabs. It's all HTML5 based. It shows you what's going on in the cluster, what's going on the storage, what's going on the VMs. It all is HTML5 based. There's no Java. There's no plugins. You can export. You can do notifications. Here's a hardware view, performance view, etc. It gives you, again, just a summary view of the storage, the compute, the VMs, hardware. It gives you capacity planning. It gives you full text search, etc. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully, after you use Nutanix, you look happy like this. And I guess it's time for questions. I'll hand it over back to cStor.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thomas. That was fabulous, and I think you alluded to it in your early opening, just how complex this world can be, and getting to that end game of VDI is a little more challenging than I think people know. So thank you again. Great insight, very timely, certainly, as a lot of people are headed towards VDI. At this time, we will open up the session for questions. As a reminder, if you have questions, you can post them to the questions pane, and we will take as many as time allows. We do have a couple minutes to get in questions, so we've got a few coming in. Thomas, obviously for you, can I run View on the Acropolis hypervisor?
So View is actually a VDI solution. That's a great question. View is a VDI solution from VMware, and it's vendor logged into ESX. It only runs on ESX. So you can run View on Nutanix as soon as you choose ESX as the hypervisor. When it comes to AHV, no, you cannot, because it's not allowed by VMware. It only runs on ESX.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from our audience. What is the maximum size of a Nutanix cluster?
We don't have an upper limit, so you can grow as big as you need it to be. There's literally and virtually no limit. However, we recommend sticking into the hypervisor limit. So if you choose ESX or Hyper-V, in the latest versions of both, the limit would be 64 nodes. So we recommend that you stick to the limit of the hypervisor. But hypothetically, you can have a 128 node Nutanix cluster and then split into 264 ESX or Hyper-V clusters. Now, when it comes to AHV cluster, there is no limit, so you can grow it as big as you want or feel comfortable with.
Excellent, thank you. And then one last question coming in before we wrap for today. Is your solution Citrix ready?
Yes, we are Citrix validated, so you can run any Citrix component on version 7.7 or later. So as soon as it is Zendesk or ZenApp 7.7, all the included components like VPX, NetScaler, etc., can run on and are Citrix ready.
Fabulous. Actually, one more question just came in. Does Splunk have an API for Nutanix?
We don't have or the other way, they don't have an API for Nutanix, but they're a validated solution on Nutanix. So we have best practices, and they're validated by Splunk that you can run Splunk on Nutanix.
Excellent, thank you.
We have, follow up to that, we have REST APIs which are wide open and published. So if you need to do automation stuff on Splunk, you can do it using our REST APIs which are public and open. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to thank you for that answer. That's great. Okay, it looks like we're running out of time. So before we let everyone go for today, that wraps up our main session and our Q&A. I would like to just briefly pass it back to Chris Krieger before we let you go for a few important closing thoughts. Thank you again to Thomas for some great information today. Chris,